Mikey, would you like to take the roll, please?
I don't know.
Well, maybe if you take the roll, they'll find their seats.
All right. All righty. We know Mr. Dasberg isn't here. Ms. Duncan? Here. Mr. Edwards? Mr. Meyer?
Present.
Ms. Parker is in the building. I know she's here, as is Mr. Perez. Oh, thank you. Mrs. Roberts? Yes. She's here. Commissioner Smith? Dr. Solano? Here. Mr. Stavros?
Here.
Mr. Tripp?
Here.
And Mr. Martin?
He's here.
He's here. Madam Chair, you have a quorum.
Thank you. I heard Tico refer to our committee as the SPASCO committee. I'm not sure that I can live comfortably with the SPASCO committee, but as you know, Frank Martin and I will be co-chairing this committee, which has dividing lines in terms of responsibility, and we'll get into that more thoroughly later on in the meeting. And we will be alternating, chairing this component of the meeting. So you'll be hearing from both of us, I'm sure. I would ask for approval of the minutes from our last meeting.
To move.
Is there a second? Okay. Okay. Any objections to the minutes? Then they stand as written. We also have an item for presentation this morning, which we will hear from both Governor Duncan and Dr. Lamone, dealing with the Johnny Bird Alzheimer's Center and Research Institute amended articles. I know there has been considerable discussion about this over time, but I believe Dr. Lamone's going to give us a brief background statement.
Stay closer to the mic.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just quite briefly, members, you recall that the Johnny B. Bird Alzheimer's Center and Research Institute was created by the Florida legislature and has been in existence for a few years, and that the Board of Governors has a level of responsibility and oversight stipulated in statute. You recall that earlier this year, in March of this year, the board undertook a review, cursory review of the operations and management of the Bird Center and submitted to you, and which you approved, a set of recommendations that was then transmitted to the legislature that made it clear that there were efficiencies to be gained if there was a stronger affiliation between the University of South Florida and the Institute. Subsequent to that, and further review by the legislature, the Bird Center's own review, and substantial work by the University of South Florida, an affiliation agreement was reached. And the purpose of the action before you, and here I'll defer to your General Counsel, Vicki Shirley, who is here, but the purpose of the action is to approve an amended and restated set of articles of incorporation which provide for that affiliation agreement and the creation of an affiliation board. I would point out that whereas Governor McDevitt served as initial chair's designee to sit on the Bird Board, subsequent to her becoming chair of the Board of Governors, Governor Duncan now sits on that board, and I believe that Governor Duncan will be able to provide you with both a status report as to what has been done with regard to the affiliation between the two entities, and also a recommendation with regard to the Articles of Incorporation. If you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer them, and or your General Counsel. Otherwise, Madam Chair, I would suggest that you may recognize Governor Duncan for a report.
Any questions of Dr. Lamone?
Okay. Just to let you know, this has really been an enormous undertaking for the last several months. both with the USF staff and the Byrd Center staff. And it is making incredible progress and moving in the right direction. And I think at the end of the day, it's something we're all going to be very proud of for both the moving forward of Alzheimer's research and a good thing just for our state in general with this very important initiative. And the joint affiliation agreement that I'm going to be moving approval of really provides a framework for integrating the research, the education, the clinical care programs, the activities of each institution so that we can maximize the opportunities, eliminate some of the duplication that may exist, and really get the focus on the Alzheimer's research, using resources which are very limited, as we all know, as best as possible. To do that, though, we've had to kind of go a unique path because we have a Byrd board, and we have a USF board, and we have a board of governors, and we have a lot of cooks in the kitchen. But the general idea is to have this joint affiliation board, which really will soon assume the management of the Byrd Center. And it will be responsible and accountable for the day-to-day administration. The Byrd Board will continue to function in an advisory advocacy board with ongoing responsibility for engaging community leaders, legislators, other support in the mission of the center, raising public awareness, and continuing the philanthropic support of the center. Dr. Steve Klasko, who is the Vice President for USF Health and the Dean of the College of Medicine, was appointed as the CEO, and he will be responsible for the daily management of the Byrd Center. But obviously he has a tremendous team under him, and it's not, I don't know if he's sleeping very much, but it's, he's still doing all of his work and really has just, it's been an amazing accomplishment. It is one of those meetings when we go listen to the updates and the reports, you just kind of go, wow, that much happened since we last talked, which is an exciting thing to see the progress moving forward. We've got October's kind of one of our next big timelines where we're going to have a much more fleshed out action plan, and we'll have more updates for you. It is very complicated. There's a lot going on. We're having to do more with less, and so I just, at this point, though, feel very strongly that we are moving the ball in the right direction, and we're getting results, and stay tuned. And with that, I would move approval of the affiliation agreement, but if you have any specific questions on the legal document, I would defer to Vicki Shirley for those. Move approval of the bylaws before you. Sorry.
Excuse me, Governor Duncan. You're asking the board, and the Byrd Institute has asked the board to approve the amended and restated Articles of Incorporation,
Okay.
which authorize them to enter into the affiliation agreement, create a joint affiliation board. It also recognizes amendments made to the articles last year. You may recall when we were at USF last year, they were initially presented to us, and then there were budgetary issues that had come up and also governance issues. So this set of amended and restated Articles of Incorporation also contained those amendments, which changed the name of the facility from the Florida Alzheimer's Center and Research Institute, Inc., to the Johnny B. Byrd Sr. Alzheimer's Center and Research Institute, Inc., and also recognized the change in law that then required the Board of Governors to designate a Board of Governors member to serve on the Byrd Institute board, as well as requiring the Board of Governors to approve any amendments to the Byrd Institute board's Articles of Incorporation.
Did I tell you I was a little complicated? But
Thank you.
It is moving in the right direction.
I see some hands, but I'd entertain a motion for discussion.
I had a question. The report indicated that they're still spending more than they have. How is that being addressed? I mean,
It's they're very much on they have kind of changed their whole fiscal accountability structure. They've got kind of a team with the CFO from USF and the CFO from the Byrd Center that are really changing and canceling a lot of current agreements, restructuring their expenditures. There's a group of the neuroscience clinical people who are moving into the center. They're bringing about $5 million in NIH grants with them. They hopefully have another $5 million coming with them as well. And the October meeting, I mean, by no means when I say they're moving mountains and great things are happening, there's a lot of hurdles. I mean, this is a tough, complicated situation, but the October plan is going to have a much more fleshed out fiscal budget and long-term operational part to it. They're doing all of that blocking and tackling as we speak right now.
I feel compelled always to chime in. They're not spending more than they have. They have significant assets on their books. What they are doing now is becoming a great deal more efficient
Yes.
and reducing the outlay necessary to run the operations.
But if they continued on the former path, we would have run out of money at some point in the not-too-distant future.
Governor Edwards.
For the younger people present, the older you get, the more you will appreciate this center. Following Governor Tripp's question, I had asked staff, and I'd also talked with President Jensen about this, if state university operating funds from the University of South Florida will go into this, and I've been told the answer is no. Now, I want to reaffirm that publicly. We are not assuming the financial responsibility for the operation of the Byrd Center. Is that a correct statement?
That is correct.
Could I ask a follow-on question, Madam Chair?
Yes.
Is it, okay, so that's as it relates to the current operating cost. What about next year? Do we have a sense of that?
That is, the long-term plan is what will be coming back in October, which will lay out who's doing what and who's paying for what. I mean, there's another group that does clinical research. I mean, they're working through all of the cost allocation issues as well as the ongoing operational budget issues. So that's the ongoing side of the equation is what they're putting together right now.
I think what you need to keep in mind is that the legal status has remained unchanged. The Byrd Institute still is an independent institution, and the University of South Florida is the University of South Florida, and they have entered into a contract to do certain things with one another. And so, you know, if we're going to be funding things, we'll either fund it through USF or fund it through the Byrd Board, but it remains to be seen for future activity.
Well, let me just make my question and my position clear throughout this whole conversation with the Byrd Center, and then I understand the problems that they have there. In terms of the university system's priority, this was not and has never been a major priority. All I'm saying is I will oppose forever spending of funds from the state university system operating budgets for the Byrd Center. And I think this is the same thing that the University of South Florida is telling me. They don't want to take this and run with it if it's going to cost them funds that could be appropriated to other USF purposes. And that's the point I want to make clear, that my understanding it is not, and it is not planned to, so that when somebody comes back 2 years from now and says the Byrd Center is $5 million in debt, let's give them $5 million. I'm against that and always will be.
Any other? Yes, Governor Savers.
I would like to ask President Genschaft your feelings about this, having this separate organization on campus,
Right.
and how it would fit in with your university.
Well, one of the ways that one of the very large strengths of this campus is neurosciences, brain repair, and doing stroke, Alzheimer's. This always has been one of the strengths, the neurosciences of USF. So having a Byrd Center sitting on our property with having no affiliation whatsoever didn't make any sense. Now what we're doing is, since it is an independent entity, what we're doing is working with them in a way that is similar to other sites where we're charging them for shared services. For example, if they use our audits and they use whatever parking or whatever it is, they're charged for that, and that comes out of the Byrd budget. But eventually it's going to be more integrated with USF and what we're doing in terms of neurosciences, and I think it's going to be more integral to both institutions.
Other questions? Yes,
You know,
Governor.
what we're really saying is, what we're really saying is that we're engaged, and when are we going to have the wedding? I mean, we can't, I don't think we should kid ourselves and say that this is forever, Governor, going to stay an independent entity, and I think she's just confirmed it. It's on their property. They've now entered into this agreement. It sounds like the board that was running it has become an advisory board. It's only a matter of time that it's going to be part of the budget request. And so I think the bigger question, and I don't know if we even have a say on that, is, what's the Board of Governors' role? Have the Board of Trustees of USF decided, yes, this fits in their mission and they want to bring it in, and they're going to be willing down the road to make it part of the university, and then I guess ask the Board of Governors for some stamp of approval. I mean, am I...
Governor Tribb, I don't know that I would take it that far. And first of all, it's not the action before us today, and I don't want to prejudge. I don't think there's enough hours in the day for us to get into a debate over whether we would or wouldn't want to integrate it fully into USF. There are other independent institutions that function with affiliations with our universities that have worked pretty successfully, and this may be one that does just that. So I think we'll get into more discussion than we need to if we try to predict the future to that degree. So I don't want to expand the motion beyond what we've been asked to do. I do have another question just from the audit experience, and that it may be something that Vicki can answer, but to the extent they're operating fully independently, I'm assuming that, I mean, at least from a financial standpoint, I'm assuming that they have their own independent audit function and compliance function that they are adhering to. And can somebody tell me how that reporting works?
As I understand it, both USF's internal auditors have been working with them, and they have had their own external audits that have been done. And yeah, there is total transparency on all fronts on that side of the equation. So I think that, again, I think towards the end of October, the next big report and plan is going to address a lot of these questions, and I concur completely with Governor Pappas that I don't think there is a predictated outcome to this. I think everyone is really working in the best interests of what is going to make sense and how can they make it work and be the most effective solution possible. And I think that's really, they seem to have a very open book policy. My understanding is both audit teams have been in there and been working. They're getting their arms around it. They've built in a lot of control mechanisms on all expenditures right now going forward in this interim period so that everything's being accounted, because one of the challenges was, as a smaller organization, they had a lot of duplicate roles being done by the same person, which doesn't necessarily comply with the ideal scenario from a fiscal control thing. So they're working with USF to remedy all of that, and that all of those have been some of the very initial priorities of making sure the financial house was in order.
Well, I would ask, and maybe Governor Tripp and the audit committee, you could consider just looking as this unfolds to make sure, because we've had this issue with some of these independent activities, and to the extent they are not embraced financially in this university system or USF, and President Genschaft and I have had this conversation on different occasions, that it's a challenge to draw the line because the public perception is it's related to the university. So we just want to make sure that the controls that are in place are appropriate to the occasion, and maybe you could consider that and make sure that
welcome. I'm sure we can get the CFOs to get on a phone call with you and walk you through all of that if you'd like.
Governor Edwards.
One quick comment by way of history and my concern. At the University of South Florida, a number of years ago, a major eye center was constructed. It was a financial disaster. It turned out that the Barnett Bank lost a small fortune on the deal, and everybody in the state was furious with the then Board of Regents because we didn't take over that losing operation. And fortunately, the building was remodeled because the way it was built, it couldn't be used for anything else. I just want to make sure that we're not committing ourselves to getting into another situation where if this is not successful, then they're going to come back to us and say, okay, you're the bad guys, now fund this.
We understand.
Any other discussion? All right, I believe, Governor Duncan, you made the motion, and Governor Roberts has seconded the motion. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? All right. Thank you. The next item on the agenda is a fairly broad discussion, and I want to give you a little context. We're going to talk about educational attainment in general, but it has three separate components, talking about the pipeline and workforce projections, talking about the Florida college system, and then finally the issue of enrollment planning that Governor Edwards brought up previously. Each one of those has a fair degree of independent thought and discussion. We don't have a whole lot of time. We probably are talking about 45 minutes to an hour to get through this. So I want you to certainly engage on each of these issues, and we will be getting into these topics in greater detail as we work through our work plans in strategic planning. But there are some very timely issues that we need to confront today. Chancellor Rosenberg is going to open the discussion with us on the overall subject matter of what the pipeline looks like and workforce projections. Chancellor.
Well, good morning. I do ask board members to bear with us. This will be a three-part presentation. I'll start off with the long-term. The mid-run issues will be addressed in part by Commissioner Smith in the development of the state college system. Then I will return and address directly the issues that Governor Edwards and others in our briefings have raised about current enrollment policy. Long term, there is a growing consensus in the business community of this state, including our Florida Chamber, our Council 100, Enterprise Florida, and others, that developing talent is critical to the economic future of Florida. One of the cornerstones of an economy built on talent and the innovation that comes with talent is educational attainment, the educational attainment level of those people who live in this state. And so included in your packet is a presentation which was made at the first meeting of the Florida College System Task Force. And that would be in the tab under strategic planning after page 19. Now you'll note in this that the second and third slides show the gap between where Florida is today at 27% of the working population with a bachelor degree or higher compared to 29% nationally, and the 33% of the top 10 states. That is to say that we are considerably behind in terms of educational attainment where we might be if we were in the top 10. And we have on the screen for you a slightly different display where you can see that that Florida is the red dot in the middle, and on your left, the y-axis, the percentage of the 25 to 64 population that have a bachelor degree, and on the x-axis, the state gross domestic product per capita. So in essence, what this says is those states that have a higher GDP per capita, higher wealth, generally tend to have a more educated population. It's hard, perhaps impossible, to find a state or country that does have a highly productive economy without a highly educated population. There are some exceptions. Alaska would be one. Alaska depends more on natural than on human resources. But you heard at the last presentation at our meeting in Jacksonville, Tony Villamil talk about the critical role that factor productivity is going to play in the next round of Florida's growth. And factor productivity he was referring to as human factor productivity. That is to say, the ability of our citizenry to add value in the production process. And in the 21st century knowledge economy, adding value to the production process comes through, in part, education. The last slides in the presentation that you have made to the task force a week ago summarize some of the strategic thinking on this issue that has been going on in our business community. And we have requested that our business community take this issue very seriously. Where do we need to be to stay competitive? Indeed, our business leadership has started using a 2030 time horizon for long-term planning. And so we're going to ask Nate Johnson to address that. And before we do, let me just say that for those of you who continue to look at this graph before you, Nate, could you just, is it possible to go back to that just for 1 second? That for those of you who continue to look, essentially Florida, it being in the middle here, if we were to move up, the difference for Floridians and the difference for our economy today, if we were a top 10 state, we would have a gross state product on an annual basis that was fully $200 billion greater than it is today. We're currently roughly at $600 billion. We would be a little over $800 billion as an economy. And I would submit to you that if we were, we would have a more diversified economy, an economy that was far less dependent upon the drivers that Mr. Villamil pointed out at the last meeting. So in many ways, the stakes are high, and one of the challenges that we have is that we don't really have a goal at this point as to where we should be. So it's any port in the storm, and that is very dangerous at this point in the state's evolution because we do have a new delivery system coming on board. So, Nate, if you would like to then move to your presentation.
Okay, it's going to take me just a minute to get it up here. So this is fleshing out a little bit what the Chancellor just talked about. We've been using 2030 as a time horizon because in discussions with the business community and the Chamber of Commerce, that's the time horizon that they've been using. So if we were to get to the top 10 state status by 2030, we would need to have about 33.4% of our state's population with a bachelor degree or higher. Okay, so what this graph shows is that what that goal looks like by 2030. Right now we're at about 26.7%, and if we break it down a little bit to what we would need to have to be at 33.4% at the top 10 state level, we'd need about 4.5 million citizens with bachelor or higher degrees based on the best population projections we have available right now. And right now, only about 700,000 of those are currently in the state. So we can only count on 700,000 of our current citizens to fill that 4.5 million number by then. In addition to that, we'd need about another 640,000 just to cover population growth that we're expecting. We need about 900,000 to cover the increased population growth of bachelor degree holders in that age group. We need about close to 2 million just to cover people who are cycling out of that core age group in the workforce. And then we needed about another 300,000 for projected mortality in that age group. So this is a way of looking at what the economic demand for bachelor degrees could be if, as a state, we want to move toward having a top 10 economy. The other way of looking at demand is looking at it from the student perspective, and these are things that we sometimes confuse when we're talking about what is the demand for bachelor degrees. There are two ways to look at that. One is from the business community side or the economic side. The other is from the student side, and ideally we would like those things to line up. Of course, a third of the population with a bachelor's degree is a somewhat arbitrary goal, but it at least gives you a baseline to compare against. If we look at the student pipeline in the state, there are different ways to do this as well, of course, also. But we would expect at our current rates of high school completion, college attendance, college completion, and participation in post-secondary education by non-traditional age students to have about 3.6 million bachelor degree holders by 2030, or a gap of about 900,000 relative to what that 33.4% figure would imply. So what is our capacity? And this is the third part of it. And these are all ways that you could think about what our planning goals should be for enrollment planning, for degree planning, trying to get these three things lined up. Capacity, of course, is largely determined by resources. Somebody has to pay for the education, whether it's the student through tuition at public private institutions or the state for slots at public institutions. But if we just project out our current capacity, we would expect to have about 3.2 million bachelor degrees by 2030 based on our current rates of production. And this includes, of course, the 700,000 who are already here. We would expect to have about 670,000 come into the state through the net migration of people with bachelor or higher degrees. The SUS, at our current rates of degrees awarded each year, would generate about 1.2 million or 1.1 million by 2030. The community colleges or the state colleges that are currently producing bachelor degrees would only generate about 13,000 degrees by that time if they don't grow at all, which of course is an assumption that is not true. But this is just taking our current rates of production. And then the private sector would contribute about 650,000 degrees by 2030. And the goal in planning for this long-term time horizon would be to try to get those three ways of looking at the number of degrees to line up somehow. If we do, in fact, want to keep top 10 state status as a goal for 2030, then we would want to line up the student demand so that there are students coming through the pipeline who can help us get to that level, and the capacity of our institutions. So there are a lot of ways that you could do that, combinations of improving achievement in K-12, increasing the capacity of the different sectors. But just to give you an example, if we increased some of the key student demand ratios, and this is not, incidentally, the public high school graduation rate, since we're looking at all students in the state, not just the public high schools, but private high schools and as well. If we increase that from 67 to 75%, if we increase the college attendance rate to 75% from about 56% of students going more or less immediately into college after high school, and if we increase the college graduation rate, again for public and private, to about 75%, that would help us get substantially toward the goal. And finally, if for those who don't take the straight shot through college, if we increase the participation rate and the degree completion rate of somewhat older students from about 15 per 1,000 in that population to about 20, that would get us to the goal by then. As far as the capacity of the different sectors in the state to help us get there, we would expect we would need to have a substantial growth, at least in the short term, from the new state colleges, 30% for the first several years and 15%, let me move this back, 15% thereafter, and then about 4% growth rates in state colleges and private colleges. And that would create the capacity within the system to help us to get to 4.5 million degrees. Now, I don't know if 4.5 million is the exact number we want to use, but clearly there are some gaps between where we would want to go as a state economically and the kind of educational attainment that we would need to help us get there. And so working both on the capacity issues and on the student achievement and student attainment will be critical, however we want to configure it to getting to that goal. And
so Nate, just to put a punctuation point, if we continue at just present status quo, where will we be in 20 years in terms of this goal of 4.5 million?
If we continue in the status quo,
If we can maintain the status quo,
right,
really.
if we maintain the status quo, we would be at about 3.2 million degrees. If everyone in the state awarded the same number of degrees next year and through 2030 that they're currently awarding, we would have about 3.2 million citizens with bachelor or higher degrees. And that would be actually a substantially lower educational attainment rate for the state than we currently have.
That's it? Are there, yes, Governor Morton.
If we were to look forward to 2020 and have everything lined up the way you have here, what would our state economy look like? What major shifts would you see us moving from a tourism-based? I mean, what's going to be the outlook and looking at from a 30,000-foot level?
Well, that's a good question, because obviously the educational attainment rate is a necessary but not sufficient condition for having the kind of economic growth that would get us to the top 10 state level. I mean, if you look at those states, they have, in addition to having a lot of bachelor degree holders, they have a lot of advanced degree holders, they have a lot of scientists, they have a lot of research activity. So this is kind of an index, but. Yes, we would need to have a much more diversified economy, a talent-based economy, and I think if you think about how you get from where we are now to where we are then, one of the problems with some of the labor force projections that we sometimes use in the short term, which is reasonable, if you look in the long term. The assumption that we're always going to have the same kind of economy in the future that we have today can be a self-fulfilling prophecy. So if we want to move the economy forward, we probably need to start generating the kind of talent base that would be a foundation for that economy. We would need to have, and we could probably expect to generate, as a result of having a more talented workforce, a lot more high-tech jobs, a lot more jobs based on innovation and creativity than we currently have.
Madam Chair.
Madam Chair.
If I could, Governor Tripp, before we, to frame the discussion, because I think what we would like to do is get input from the board members on. And I think Nate's done a very good job, and the Chancellor as well, of giving us the data that points and objectives. The challenge that we have is this conversation is being had, to your point, Frank, that to talk about it in the context of baccalaureates as a generic term only gets us part of the way into the conversation.
This was a data question, and just simply,
okay.
How much capacity can the university system grow? Does he understand? Do we have that? As we exist today, how much additional capacity to get to what he's talking about there does the system have? Has he looked at that?
Well, I suspect it's largely a funding question, but I'll let the Chancellor respond to that.
Well, back of the envelope, if we need to produce about 1.3 million additional baccalaureate degrees, help me out here, Nate, or anybody else, we're currently producing about 47,000. There's about 60, in total, about 60,000 baccalaureate degrees being produced in the state.
It's close to 70.
Okay, so we would have to double our production we'd have to double our production immediately to begin to approximate that target. And so we would have to move roughly to 80,000 baccalaureate degrees.
May I?
Which goes back to my point about the nature of what those baccalaureate degrees look like and what the system looks like and what the roadmap is that we're trying to get to. Because there's baccalaureate degrees come in all shapes and sizes. Granted, we can't necessarily predict what the economy is going to look like over that horizon and what are going to be the disciplines that are emerging and or more successful or less successful, but we can understand things about the degree that the nature of the degrees in terms of the progression. Are they in technical fields? Are they in other disciplines? Is it the medical sciences? Is it related industries in that era? And so the challenge becomes trying to translate that number of degrees into what does a system look like, what is the role of the state university system in planning for that, and what's the role of this board in coordinating those objectives. And I think we've been struggling with that question in the whole concept of strategic planning. I think that too was the goal of the legislature in bringing up the concept of a state college system. The challenge, though, is it becomes a conversation strictly of access if you only focus on a number of baccalaureate degrees, and it doesn't become a conversation about to attain what in the way of productivity and capacity and capability that leads to better economic opportunities for all of our citizens. And my observation, this is a personal frustration of mine, and that is the legislature approached the issue of ad valorem taxation, and I'm very sympathetic to what brought that about. But my perspective is the place this state is going is it's going to get more and more expensive to live here, and it's going to get more and more expensive to live everywhere else. And our answer can't be to keep trying to cut taxes to save money. That's part of it. But we've got to get higher wages, and that's ultimately the better solution. So I personally would like to see an objective that focuses us, focuses the legislature, and focuses the public on how do we go about making this conversation meaningful to every man and woman on the street to change the way we think about our state and where it's going. So, those are, to me, the kind of long-term objectives we need to be focusing on, and I don't know if you all share those views or anybody has any other comments.
Well, in essence, there is a sense of urgency in setting and knowing where we're going. And without that larger target and knowing why, then it makes it more difficult for our universities to plan. It makes it more difficult for us to hit workforce targets, which we want to do. It makes it more difficult for us to allocate our research investments into areas that will have multipliers because there's an overall statewide focus and consensus on that. And so we're part of this conversation. We're not the only part of the conversation, but right now we have the main investment and the major equity in the conversation.
Well, I think the goal that we have to focus on, and it's timely that the State College Task Force is trying to gain input and draw conclusions about where the legislation takes them, because in essence, as I read the legislation, it opens the door of opportunity for such a system, but really leaves open the question of what it looks like in relationship to the state university system. And I think answering those questions tells us where we go in responding to what the Chancellor has presented us today. And with that, we're going to hear from Commissioner Smith on some of the work that has been going on in the College System Task Force and how we might fit into that discussion.
Thank you very much. Pleasure to give you a kind of an update on where this work is. As indicated, this really is a legislative issue. They have set out a charge, really two groups in the state to come back with options or recommendations around set issues for this coming legislative session for the governor and for the state legislature and the state board and the Board of Governors all to weigh in on about ultimate direction of this state college concept. In your materials behind, I think it's on page 33, there's a PowerPoint which I will not go through. Unless you have questions, I'll respond to that later, but I'd just like to make some summary remarks about where we are with this effort. Summarize some of the key issues in the legislation. The legislation does, call for a Florida college system that would include institutions that grant both 2-year and 4-year degrees, would not offer graduate programs at these institutions, that the expectation is that they will offer baccalaureates that are in a very cost-efficient manner, and that result in, quote, substantial savings, and that the institutions not use the term university in their name and so forth. A little about the 2 task forces that are operating and their charge and the status of their work at this point. We have the State College Task Force itself, which I'm blessed to chair, and we have met one time. We'll be meeting again on October the 2nd. I'll talk more about that in a minute. We have a good group of non-pilot schools. These are schools that are not part of the pilot program that was established last session. A good representation of community college presidents and others. And I just read through the institutions that are represented by their presidents. Broward College, Central Florida Community College, Palm Beach Community College, Pasco Hernando Community College, Tallahassee Community College, Florida Community College at Jacksonville, Seminole Community College. Dr. Genshaft is on the committee as well, University of South Florida. Art Kirk, president of St. Leo College, is on the committee, and Art Kaiser, chancellor from Kaiser University, is on the committee, as is Dean Colson, the special advisor to the governor on higher education. So this constitutes the task force. We did meet earlier on September the 4th here in Tampa. Had a brief review of Senate Bill 1716 that spells out our charge and the responsibilities of the task force. We had a presentation by a business and industry panel on workforce and economic needs for Florida. That included Barney Bishop, Chris Hart, Susan Paragus, John Adams, and Mark Wilson. And I think the business panel did absolutely a stunning job in spelling out the need for post-secondary education, SUS, as well as state college work, the need for maintaining strong AA production, AS production, technical skill training, rapid response to business needs, as well as expansion of baccalaureate offerings and continued support of graduate work. But again, a strong need to be responsive to the regional business needs within the state of Florida that match up with the state's strategic plan. So again, they gave a good presentation. It's also available, by the way, if anybody would like to kind of listen to what their comments, we can get that to anyone. We also had a presentation by Jay Pfeiffer, who works for the Department of Education, on some of the pipeline issues, some of these charts that we're seeing now about our production of students in the K-12 and where their life journeys take them. Task Force is charged to address really 4 critical issues. One is the issue of governance if we move into a state college structure. What are some options around the governance of that new and emerging structure? Second is recommendations for the legislature and the governor on state college transition criteria. How would a community college transition to become a state college? Third would be baccalaureate degree approval process. What's the mechanism to establish baccalaureate programs and so forth within your institution and gain accreditation? And then finally, and maybe should be the first, is the funding options, how to fund this program. Part of the work of the task force, and we have not engaged in this conversation yet, but funding and also some discussion, at least an acknowledgement around revenue sources to provide that level of funding. Where is that going to come from? So these are the 4 big issues that are to be discussed and decided upon. We have also a state college pilot task force, and this is a group that has extraordinarily similar tasks before them to talk about governance, state college transition, degree approval, program approval process, and funding options. They are constituted by the current pilot schools as identified in the last session. They include Chipola College, Daytona Beach College, Edison College, Indian River College, Miami-Dade College, Okaloosa, Walton College, Polk College, Santa Fe College, and St. Petersburg College. They have met early summer, June 12th, began their work. After the first meeting, they assigned the task to their business officers to start to explore funding options. They met again on September the 3rd, agreed to some guiding principles, and met on September the 19th, and again are moving rapidly to try to prepare a draft of some recommendations to be considered. Both of these groups are going to convene here in Tampa on October the 2nd. It's going to be a joint meeting that will run from 1 to 5. I would state that one of the issues, I guess, raised by the business leaders at the panel that talked to the task force last time posed the question, why do we have two groups? Other than the fact it's spelled out in law, but if we're to do this, why are we going to offer two reports on same tasks? So I will be posing that question to both groups: is are we going to in fact offer up two separate sets of recommendations, or should we work to bring those together and show more consensus around the issues to be discussed? We do have, the task force has outside consulting services that we've acquired to help guide some of our thought and discussion around these. Dick Richardson out of NYU is going to be at the October 2nd meeting, and we have others as well that we're working with to make sure that we're as well informed as possible. It is I think a major undertaking, and it is one that certainly has huge impact on the strategic planning of the state university system. We are one and the same at the end of the day, baccalaureate production and so forth, and our goal, and we need to work in a consistent fashion. So it's an issue that we need to find some good agreement around. Judy, would you like to make any comments about the first meeting and the work so far?
I thought the first meeting was an excellent meeting. The data that we were given, the issue that we have with the baccalaureate program is not just about colleges. It's all about the entry, the graduation rates in high school aren't what they need to be in order to prepare the students at the level that we're talking about for the baccalaureate degrees. So it's really a systematic level issue for the whole state that we have to work with on these baccalaureate programs. I thought the industry panel was phenomenal. They really were very clear, and they stated themes, each one, and they spoke independently of one another, but their themes kept coming through, and one was make sure this meets the critical workforce needs, not to set up programs that don't meet any of the workforce needs that we have in the state of Florida. The other was, please, please, please avoid any unnecessary duplication that would cause more inefficiency. Make sure that this is really clean, efficient, and not to have unnecessary or undesirable duplication. The whole issue, they were really puzzled because they said people from all over the country come in and look to model after Florida's 2+2 system. And what's happened? I mean, why isn't that working out? And that was just a question that they had asked. It's a phenomenal presentation that they made. The other issue that is a big one, I believe, and that is the whole issue of regionalism, not regionalism. What does this mean for the state colleges? And they were just stressing, be smart about this, and as the commissioner had said, why are we having two reports? Because we have a pilot project group that is working absolutely independently of this state task force group. And so the legislature will be receiving two reports. But the first meeting, I thought, was very informative.
I would say, just in closing, and open to any questions you might have, both advisory groups are scheduled to complete their work by December. Probably final reports are expected to be provided to the State Board of Education in January, and we'll make them available to the Board of Governors as well, the Governor's Office, legislature, and so forth, and then they'll move on from there. But we do expect to have final edited reports for publication sometime in early to mid-January timeframe. Yes.
I did attend part of the time, both of those meetings that were in Tampa days apart, and I was confused, quite frankly, because the pilot group, and I'm just looking at your slide here that talks about what your deliverables are. They've already gone way past you in terms of what program approval process and all that sort of thing. So I guess my point is, if the legislature is going to get two separate reports, how do you weight those? I mean, I'm very confused.
Right.
Does your group look at state colleges, methodologies for becoming state colleges beyond just community colleges? I mean, would you say that maybe you'd have a startup college, or maybe you'd have a recommend a branch campus? I mean, are they going to include methodologies that would take into account other places or other ways to have a college? And these folks are just focused on community colleges? I'm a little confused about it.
I think both groups have the responsibility to look at the historical community college structure and how to transition to a state college structure. So, saying that the makeup of both groups are certainly different. The pilot schools are exclusive to that population of presidents, and I think are doing a fine job and are working collaboratively with us. I'd say that we're sharing a lot of information before and after meetings and so forth. The task force has representation from a much broader arena. So again, I can't predict the nature of the conversation. We have broken up into subgroups. We'll be bringing back recommendations on each of these. At the end of the day, it'll be the legislature that'll have to weigh out these two reports.
But your look is limited to community colleges.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
That was just not clear.
Right.
Yes, Governor Dunn.
Is it possible, do you have the presentations, the business community presentations that you both have said were so good? Are those something that are available we could take a look at?
We do have, yeah, I have those. I'd be happy to get them to Mark and get them around that way. It'd be great. Yeah. They're worth your time, and I think it's important for the Board of Governors as well as others about how we think about the need for the future. It reinforces the kind of data that was presented earlier by Mark.
I had a business leader who I will not name asked me a question the other day in the context of this very discussion that said, where would I find the strategic plan for higher education in Florida? To which I replied, I have no idea. And what it brought home to me is the fact that it's almost as if we're backing now into trying to figure out what is the strategic plan for higher education. I mean, we've talked a lot about the state university system, but obviously the junior colleges have historically had an important role to play in that. The independent colleges have an important role. The state colleges will now have an important role. But without focusing first on what's the plan, which is really getting into this data point business and figuring out where are we trying to go and what are our objectives, that's, to me, at least the way my mind works, an easier starting point for laying out the structure than starting with the structure and then trying to cram the data points and the objectives into the structure. So I really am sympathetic to the challenge that you're facing, because it's almost as if you now have to embrace that whole concept of bringing all these planning efforts together without the input of the very organizations that have developed their plans. And so it's it's quite a challenge.
Yeah, if I could, and again, I think now is the time. We obviously are receiving, I think, excellent critique and review by the state university system on this, and I think that needs to be ongoing. I think iterations of the work that comes out and reaction to the final reports from both bodies needs to be heard by the state university system. And I think we absolutely must, if you listen to the business leadership, we must move away from a focus on institutional or even Board of Governors, community college interest, self-interest, and to an absolute commitment to state interest about the economic future of the state and how are we going to serve our children. It's clear that we have a need for more baccalaureate production. We have issues around funding and of that work, but there are basic capacity issues. Can community colleges help to fill that niche? Certainly can, but they need to be part of a larger, my view is they need to be part of a larger strategic plan to meet that 2030 expectation for the state, or we're going to fall short and we're not going to step up to the service that the state needs. And I think, again, the legislature will benefit through some hard conversations, some difficult discussions around these issues, but now is the time to have that rather than in March. We should have those now between now and January 1st.
Well, with that thought in mind, we do have a working piece that was included in your materials, which is efforts of our staff, and I think each one of us had an opportunity to review those, listing out some thoughts and recommendations that we would like to communicate to the task force, and I think it would be helpful for us to take some formal action to pass that on to them as thoughts that we would like to be considered and addressed as you undertake your efforts. But it's very, very important to us that we take advantage of your invitation to be at the table and give you our thinking and critique the work product that comes out of that. Is there a motion to consider those materials? Are there any comments that people would like to make before we do so? Any
just
discussion?
One comment that concern comes up again that there is a lot of attention paid to access, so that we don't find a system in the state that becomes elitist. The first step is we become a system with state colleges, and then we decide that K through 12 is not doing a good enough job, so what we've got to do is we've got to have some kind of system to limit who can get into the state colleges. And I think that needs to be addressed for the public up front, because many people that use the community college system, that come into our system on the 2+2, many times are 31, 32, 33, don't really have that grounded, I've just got out of high school type situation. And I know you're speaking to that, but I think all of us need to recognize that the only way we're going to increase the gross product of our citizens is to afford opportunity for everybody. And many of those people are not just coming out of high school. I think there's a great deal of our population in this state that are stuck in positions where they can't make a good living, but we afford them the opportunity by our community college system, in which will now probably become a state college system, and that should focus on that group. And I hope we're doing that.
Right. We will be, and I think you're obviously the data supports what you say. You're right on target. That this year, as a case in point, we have a huge spike in enrollment in community colleges. Huge, phenomenal spike in enrollment, all tied to economic issues and so forth. But mid-career people are looking for other opportunities and other forms of training, and are coming back to community college for that work. And so this whole package really needs to be seen as a total. I would share also just that the other really, I think, significant piece of work that's going on this year is the development and implementation a year from now of the new high school accountability program, which will hopefully have a positive impact on the readiness of students that are moving on to the state university system or the state college system in the future, and that will have another impact on our, again, state strategic ability to meet the economic needs of the future.
Thank you. Governor Wise.
to speak to your point, I think I speak for myself. I am very proud of the fact that we have an open door policy, that there's no one in our state that cannot have an opportunity for higher education, that even with a GED, they can go to a community college. We have grade forgiveness if they have areas that they need or maybe they're limited in. First remedial courses and grade forgiveness, and if they have opportunities and long enough, they can get their degree, their AA degree, and then be accepted into a university if they are qualified after all this exercise to do the work. It's a wonderful system. I believe, and I've been told since I've started this journey a long time ago, that we did it better than any other state. And there are people that I know who are very successful that were limited in their opportunities early on, but were persistent and took advantage of this precious system. And I do know we need more baccalaureate degrees. Every study shows that. We need a workforce that's educated in areas that our state needs. We need to increase this availability of people with baccalaureate degrees. But I know that you will keep into consideration this system that's been so precious to so many people and given opportunities to families that when any other system would not have had success. So it is very important. And my concern is that you pay attention. I mean, I know that you will because we've had this conversation in our baccalaureate system that is new, that it doesn't limit access so that people don't have an opportunity to improve their family.
Yes, Governor McDonough.
Commissioner Smith, just from what I can piece together here reading about this, it looks, and this kind of speaks to Governor Roberts and Governor Tripp's comments about not excluding people, but it looks to me like what we might end up with is a system of state colleges and a system of colleges that are still within the community college system. The colleges not having the same rigor associated with moving to upper division as the state colleges have, and then we would have the university system. Is that a possibility? Because it looks like the legislation says that if you want to be a state college, you have to require classed or an AA to move to upper division, whereas that would not be the case in the regular college system, because there are some that are giving baccalaureates that have not chosen to become a state college.
Well, again, I think this is the work in progress. Nothing's final till it's final, and I think that we have to have a very keen eye on articulation and those issues of transfer and quality and open access. If we've been ranked #1 in the nation for the last 6 years for AA production out of our community colleges. Has served Florida well. If we lose that distinction and that service as a result of migrated baccalaureates, we've lost something very special in the nation. And so issues of access, maintaining those things that are right for us now, and making sure that we have good articulation and agreement, and we don't end up forming 3 or more fragmented systems that don't have good relationship to each other, will serve nobody. And so, particularly our students that we're here to work with. So, I think these are going to be the tough decisions, and making sure that not just philosophically we agree to that, but from a technical standpoint is put into law and rule that this is the way institutions will operate to assure these kinds of provisions remain and will go forward.
One added point from, I'm sorry, Governor Solano, go ahead. I'll finish up.
The question that I wanted to ask was whether or not you, and it kind of follows what's been said here previously, whether or not you anticipated that there would be some community colleges who would choose to remain truly community colleges. And now Governor McDivitt has opened up another prospect that I find a little frightening, is we could have truly community colleges with no baccalaureates. We could have this institution that was sort of a community college, but it offered baccalaureates,
That's
but
what
wasn't.
we have now, by the way.
But,
Yeah,
but
we
isn't part of the state college system. Then we can have the state college system, and then we can have the university. So we potentially are looking at 4 different systems as opposed to 3. But getting back, do you have any sense of whether or not there are some community colleges that would like to just simply retain being a community college and supporting that particular mission?
I think there's that possibility. Again, time will have to tell what kind of pressures are put on institutions to migrate to a different set of offerings. At this point in time, we're up to half of all the community colleges are either offering or want to offer baccalaureates at their institutions. So it's been a very rapid migration to baccalaureate offerings. So again, where that ends up, I know there are, just as with this group, I'm sure there are different points of view on this issue and how it should be structured up. There are very different points of view among community college presidents and how they see the future in the best state. I do have a lot of confidence in our community college presidents and around the state, whether they're pilot school presidents or not, to come together on key issues that are in the best interest of the state of Florida. And I think, again, at the end of the day, we might offer up a couple of reports because the legislation called for it, but they might have a lot of linkage. I hope they would have a lot of linkage and similarities and tone of what we're recommending the legislature to do.
Could I just follow up with just one? The reason I asked the question is a number of years ago I was engaged in Jacksonville in some work that was done with our public school systems, and I was struck by the number of parents who were pleading for more opportunity for vocational education for their children, and they felt like the elementary and secondary education is all pointed towards college and the pursuit of a bachelor's degree, and they had children who they knew that wasn't the track for them, but if they could get them in something with automotive skills or basic construction skills or something, they could keep them in school longer and get basic literacy kinds of skills that we would want our population to have, and then have a good trade, a job when they come out. And in large part, I think our community colleges help to meet that need for the folks who don't necessarily want to go forward for a bachelor's degree. And that's what worries me here, is that the community colleges serve just a really great function in meeting that particular need, and if they all evolve into colleges focusing on a bachelor's degree, we've got a lot of people out there coming up from the public schools or wanting to come back and pick up some training that none of us will be meeting their needs.
Yeah, I won't promise anything because the committee has to do its work and task force, and the legislature. But I really don't see that as an outcome. I do think that the commitment of the commitment is there to maintain the open access, the diversity of opportunity, degree levels, and so forth. It's how I think the real question is how do you blend these together so that we do have an articulation system and we have a further opportunity and access than we've had in the past. So,
thank you.
Just quickly then, is it your position, because the community colleges, you're really running them now, that if in an area state community college decides to move to a state college, that you will reinstate a community college in that area? You're not telling the people of the state of Florida that there won't be an existing type of college, community college there when this is done?
Under the structure, the state college would offer the AA programs, the baccalaureate programs, and the technical training programs. So they would offer the array. There wouldn't be another institution established at that location, but it'd be under as with the other colleges that have already made this transition. So within that, under their banner would be all the services available.
I would suggest that as we have the benefit of the work that comes out of the committee, let me just finish my sentence, that we get to the place where we can have a very thorough dialogue about that document, however that timetable works out with our board meetings. But it's very important that we get our input together and provide it to the commissioner and to that group. If we're too late to the party, we're only going to have ourselves to blame. President Manchin, you had a question or comment?
Yeah, I'd like to ask the Commissioner if they're going to look closely at this articulation issue. The universities are given credit for this so-called 2+2 articulation agreement. What will be our role and responsibility under this new state college system? What will be the articulation agreement responsibility for universities with state colleges? Well, would we also need to take a look at a state college that has had an articulation agreement for a 2+2, and it's not good enough for me anymore to say, well, we're going to do both. I think it opens the whole can about whether the fundamental relationship between the university system and the community colleges and this thing in the middle gets worked out. And what is that part of your dual committee role?
It is. You know, again, how deep we get down into the details of this in the time we have available to us, I think it is going to, I think, be part of the question. But our notion about maintaining 2+2, maintaining and establishing an articulation process is going to be critical. Parallel programs that offered at teaching degrees right now offered at state university systems versus at colleges, how those match up.
President Gincheff's involved in one of those committees. Right. Who will represent the interest and the concerns of the universities in the other committee?
You've got her right there in the middle of the table.
I'm already serving on two. I'm chairing one and I'm serving on the finance committee, but there are two more. I can't get to those.
Along with myself. So, again, I would encourage you, if you have specific issues, if you send me a note on those, we'll get those to the committee and we'll address them. And I do think this is a time for conversation around it. This is the time for those kind of conversations.
Yes, we're going to hear from Dr. Lamont in just a moment, and perhaps you would also like to address that in terms of the recommendations that have been put forth in this paper, because it may be that that's something we need to express more directly. I think it is a fundamental question that's going to be put back in the lap of the university system. Governor Martin?
I'm not sure I really understood your question. Are you saying that President Gincheff is on both committees, the pilot and the non-pilot committee?
No. I'm on just the state task force committee.
The pilot group is constituted by law of only presidents of the pilot schools.
So you serve on that committee?
No.
So we have nobody.
It is being facilitated by Will Holcomb, the chancellor.
So I guess my question is, do we have anyone that is representing the interests of the system on the pilot group? Or is that important to us? Is it necessary?
We don't have a choice.
I think it's defined in law. So again, I think I would share that there is good communication, the working of the pilot group, their process as well as ours. We share information all the time, and Will Holcomb certainly does a good job in keeping us informed about these issues. But the way the task force and the committee were structured by law were very tightly defined with this structure.
Okay, I guess my last question is, once both committees deliver their report around December, 1st of January, what is going to be the timeline and the process moving forward? What's going to happen after January?
The reports will be delivered will be made public. They'll be delivered to the legislature, to the governor's office, to the State Board of Education, to the Board of Governors for review. And what I envision is that at least the early intent of both committees is not to provide a report that has single recommendations. This is the way governance should be. this is the way funding should be. But both groups, at least in their early conversation, is that would be most helpful for the legislature to offer options under these structures. So you won't see a report that says this is our one recommendation on this, but probably several options that the legislature might consider. Okay.
Dr. Lamont, if you want to cover briefly the recommendations.
Very briefly, Madam Chair, I think that so many of them you've already talked about. So let me try to be brief on this subject. I will say that when Senate Bill 1716 was created, I was directed to pull together a state university system work group that would attempt to compile a set of recommendations and thoughts for the purpose of laying them before President Genschaft, who we didn't know at the time would be the state university system representative to the task force. And that was what we did with participation from all of the institutions, and you have that document before you with a series of recommendations, which I will not go through, but I would like to characterize them a little bit and say that it was a very fruitful discussion with the state university system. We took the position, certainly at the outset, that based on the evidence that you've seen from Nate and others, that there was a demonstrable need for more baccalaureate productivity in the state of Florida, that was undeniable. Secondly, we did not take a position in this paper on the realities of the bill. That is, the bill calls for the governance of a single Florida college system, which is to include state colleges, community colleges that offer a minimal number of baccalaureate degrees, and then community colleges that do not offer baccalaureate degrees. We didn't take a position on who they should report to. Rather, we focused on these kinds of things, and I should say that I really do believe that the meetings of the task force so far, and particularly the demonstration of priorities and interests by the business industry, by Enterprise Florida, the Council of 100, the Workforce Florida people, all of whom, as President Genschaft stated, created a very strong presence at the initial meeting, and I think corroborated a lot of the work that was done in this paper. To sum it up, I would say, first of all, the system work group was very proactive on the idea of the necessity for collaborative action and collaborative dialogue. That is to say that as it stood right now, as a state, irrespective of the systems, we did not have a clear vision of where we wanted to be in terms of our baccalaureate productivity 5, 7, or 10 years out. And that with the creation of a new player, the college system, state colleges, taking into consideration the independence, ICUF, proprietaries, and so on, that the time was appropriate for the state to come together and to have that dialogue. And that if we didn't do that, then the risk that we saw was not necessarily that the state college system would do too much, but that it wouldn't do enough for the state of Florida. In other words, that we may end up with a few institutions with a few name changes and a minimal number of institutionally driven baccalaureates, but we wouldn't ramp up and value add on the larger conversation of how the state was going to meet its needs. So that first issue of collaboration was very important to us. Secondly, there were issues on the quality control side. You know that our institution, some of our institutions have been offering baccalaureates for over 100 years, and we have a pretty finely honed process. And President Gensheft is representing you well in those conversations. So there's a whole series of I think, quality issues that are very important to the conversation, both in terms of program approval, but also the critical question of how an institution gets to become a state college in the first place. And there I would just say, and I'll leave it at this, that having been at all of the meetings so far, both the pilot project and the task force, that where I was unclear initially and confused by the legislation with regard to the actions of a pilot program and a task force, it became clearer and clearer to me that there were very markedly different voices between the two groups in terms of the issues of approval and governance and control. Finally, there are a host of issues which I will not go into. President Manchin indicated one, the large sort of the tip of the iceberg on articulation, but we have identified 15 or 20 issues associated with articulation-like areas. And I would say there that not only the work that's being done in the task force, but the ongoing work of the Articulation Coordinating Committee, which is a multifaceted group that works under Commissioner Smith, will be very, very important, and there your voice, the voice of the system, will be heard. One last point, and that is this. Back to the issue of when we listen to the people from Enterprise Florida, the Council of 100. As they did, we articulated in our paper the importance of focusing in critical areas, that baccalaureate production, just for the sake of more baccalaureates in any area, was really not the opportunity at hand. And that's why in our paper we offered to the Florida College System a set of areas of strategic emphasis which we believe are appropriate to the state university system, they're appropriate to Florida, and therefore they're appropriate also to the Florida College System. Once again, I think that there's a difference of opinion depending on task force or work group, but we believe that clearly the intention of the creation of this system was to respond to the workforce needs of the state, and our recommendations reflect that. Madam Chair, I'll answer any questions you want.
Thank you. Are there any questions of Dr. Lamont as far as the recommendations? Yes, Governor Edwards.
Dr. Lamont, if on recommendation 9, language such as the articulation agreements now in place between the Florida College System, the Florida Community College Systems, and the state university system should be reviewed, would your staff have any problem with that type of language? My point is, I have long shared this concern and discussed it with a number of the community colleges that are now offering baccalaureate degrees, and I'm not sure. The only place I found articulation was in recommendation 9, and I think that's a major potential problem area, and I would think we need to be more specific, not saying how to do it, but just make sure that we point out in these recommendations that the entire articulation agreement concept should be reviewed.
I think that's a very good point, and probably is more broadly states the issue than going into the level of detail in item 9. So, Dr. Lamont, does that give you enough direction to make the appropriate change? Any other comments? Yes, Governor Sloan. We do need to move on fairly soon.
Just
so
with respect to degree area identification, number 8, where it talks about concentrate on offering degrees that do not unnecessarily duplicate offerings. I find that way too vague and too open for interpretation. I would much rather see language that says where there is evidence to support the need for additional offerings at other institutions. That compels them to provide evidence to support the need for the degree.
Anyone object to that change? I think that's fine. Any other comments or observations? We'll have ample opportunity to participate in the work product that comes out of the group. Obviously, it's better to participate on the incoming side, and President Genshaft and the Commissioner, we certainly have to look to you to keep us apprised, and I know our staff's involved in it as well. But my suggestion is going to be that we consider, with the indulgence of the chair, that we consider, if necessary, holding a special meeting for the sole purpose of discussing what this report looks like, which wouldn't be interrupted by other distractions if it reaches the point where we really need the time to do so, because I'm not at all confident in our meeting.
I have no issue with that. I think it's a good idea.
Okay. Any other questions or comments with respect to that document? Then all in favor of moving those?
I think President Genshaft.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I was just going to say that I appreciate any of this input, and I support passing this. It helps me. And I also wanted to compliment the staff because they've been extremely helpful with preparing documents and getting me ready for the meetings as well. They've been great.
Well, thank you for taking it on, and thank you to the Commissioner for your attention to all this. And you're in a unique position because you're seeing it both from the bottom and the top and the middle, and you have our encouragement and sympathies.
I would. I want to leave something. I'm one that sees the glass half full, not half empty. I think we definitely have needs in the state of Florida. The question is, can we get it right when we do it? And we have an opportunity to get it right. Certainly, this input is going to help us get there. So again, I'm very optimistic about the ultimate outcome of this. So, anyway.
Thank you. Absolutely. Thank you. I'm going to move us along. Did we take a vote? All those in favor of the recommendations? Aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay. The next item we're going to cover briefly are the committee work plans. And
enrollment.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, I said we needed to move along. The Governor Edwards wasn't going to let me go by that. Enrollment planning. There is obviously a need for us to discuss action that was taken with respect to the limitation of enrollment. We need to have a discussion on that and make a decision how we wish to proceed from this meeting forward on that subject matter. I'm going to recognize the Chancellor to give us an opening remark with respect to that, and I know Governor Edwards wants to speak to it.
The plans that you have in your packet were submitted to us in July and were based on assumptions that we provided that the funding that we were provided would stabilize and that we would be able to return to growth within the 5-year scope of the plan. When we finalize the enrollment plans, which may be done in the context of our compacts, universities may need to make different assumptions or outline the impact of the different possibilities that could materialize. And that's in part why we're trying to look at the longer-term view. We're going to return to this issue in November when we actually know what your numbers look like. In the short term, however, given that our institutions, our presidents, and their staffs are making decisions about spring and summer enrollments, even as we speak, it's important to revisit and reinforce, in my mind, in our mind, the caps on freshman enrollment. This gets to Mr. Edwards' point. The freshman enrollment cap last July was the reluctant policy reaction that you had to a serious crisis in the state university system at that time, a crisis that continues. This cap reflects your commitment to quality. And let me remind you briefly where we were when the board made that decision and where we are now. Over the last 20 years, the system has nearly doubled in size while adding only one university. And while in nominal terms, the state contribution to the operating budget has increased by 146%, enrollment growth has increased by 93%, combined with inflation of 83%, means that in net purchasing power, we today receive fully $4,500 less for each full-time equivalent student than we did in 1989 when my daughter was born. Now, I'm going to assure her that there's no correlation between her birth and the declining investment in the state university system. But it has occurred, and it's real. Now, tuition has made up some of this. It's increased by about $1,000 per student in real dollars over 20 years. But the net result in 2007, 2008, when we made this decision, is that we're still about $3,400 below where we were in 1989. This has made us a very efficient system. Let's admit it. A small number of large institutions results in less duplication. Depending upon how you calculate it, we either have the lowest or the second lowest expenditure per degree of any system in the country. So we're not doing too badly in terms of efficiency. But we have to ask the question what this means for our students, because after all, they are why we are here. At the same time as enrollment has increased by nearly 100%, the number of regular faculty has increased by just 33%. In effect, as a system, we created one new faculty position for every 53 new full-time equivalent students. In the 10 years preceding the enrollment action, undergraduate enrollment increased by about 50%. But enrollment in courses with over 100 students has increased by more than 90%. More of these courses today are taught by adjuncts, by temporary faculty, and by graduate assistants than ever before. And while they are doing a heroic job for us, we are growing concerned that accreditors might take exception to this decredentializing of our educational product. This just isn't statistics then. Students complain about this phenomenon and raise it continually with a number of us. Indeed, the Princeton Review's top 20 schools, in that ranking, 3 of our universities were ranked in the top 20 where students say they study the least. That is to say that in the Princeton Review, 3 of our institutions are in the top 20 of where students study the least. There are other more scientific surveys that produce similar results. Large classes mean less interaction with faculty, fewer essays and research papers, fewer complex problems, more multiple choice, and videotaped lectures. Wholesale may be great for efficiency, but it may be inadequate for employers who are seeking market-ready graduates. This is where we were when we made the decision in July, and the situation, despite the heroic efforts of our presidents, of our boards, of our legislature, is far worse today. Final numbers aren't going to be in until October, but we almost certainly will have fewer faculty and more students than we did last year. In a normal year, we lose about 6 to 8% of our faculty to retirement and inevitable turnover. So that just to maintain the status quo, we need to hire several hundred new faculty each year. We're not going to have the final numbers, as I said, but some people now are raising the question, well, in this context, how were some of our institutions able to at least provide a cost of living adjustment to faculty salaries to help stem what we know to be a departure from our universities of many qualified and competitive faculty? The truth of the matter is that money largely came from resources that we probably could have hired additional faculty with. And so even while these bumps are modest, we know that a number of our presidents felt that we had to do this in order to send the message that we are committed to quality. This year is worse, as we've lost another 700 more in state funding per student, possibly more before this year is over. And while it is true that tuition has increased, it's only made up about $200 of that $700. It is true that when enrollment is restricted, when it's capped, universities lose out on marginal tuition dollars. And our universities are under a lot of pressure internally and externally to admit more students, to raise every dollar they possibly can to preserve the institution's operating budget. However, When we do admit more students, the end result is that we're going to have more classes taught by adjuncts, we will have larger classes, and I fear we will continue to devalue the educational experience for students already enrolled in the system. The restriction on growth in freshman enrollments that you decided upon was a line in the sand for quality that made the best of a bad situation. The purpose of our system, as set forth in the Constitution, is not primarily to provide access, but rather to achieve excellence. That's how the Constitution amendment reads. Excellence is not something we should be delegating, no matter how hard they work and how well-intended they are, to adjuncts or to graduate assistants. The board's fiduciary responsibility centers on the word excellence. Primary mission of the community college system, on the other hand, is access and is guaranteed by statute. So we need to have this discussion. You have in your packet on page 70 the notes and the minutes from the last meeting, and I know that Governor Edwards and others feel strongly about this issue, and Madam Chair, that's my lengthy but we think necessary preamble.
Madam Chair.
Yes.
We have people from the community here for the lunch. I wonder if we're able to pick this up after lunch, the discussion.
If that's the timetable we're on, I would suggest we do that.
Is that all right, Charlie? Governor Edwards?
Give more time to think.
Well, I think you have a timetable for the lunch, and
Yes.
there are people from the community there, I guess.
We're celebrating our new chair, Sheila McDivitt, at lunch, and we're very pleased that the Tampa Electric Company, of which how many years were you there?
I was there about 27.
Well, they have hosted.
40 years old.
They're hosting a lunch for all of us, and so we'd like to have you all at the lunch, which is right behind us in that room, and the guests and many friends of the chair are already here. So
That will be fine. Let's proceed that way.
Okay, so we'll start right up and finish this committee meeting and then go into our board meeting after lunch, and I promise to move it along.
So please join us. We're happy to have you all at the University of South Florida in our brand new building. Please join us.